we'll just wait for these people to come down the stairs. And then I'm going to welcome Gavin Extence to come and join me. Can we have a round of applause for Gavin, please? You can sit or stand.
I'm going to sit for the talk and then stand for the reading.
All right, then.
Okay,
Right.
mix things up.
Mix things up. Okay, hopefully the sound will be okay. Let us know if it's not. Does that sound okay? Am I near enough? Yeah? Yeah. Sound great. Thank you. So we're very excited to have Gavin with us. I've seen Gavin like once a year for the last 10 years at Novel Slam, and we've both got children, and we kind of both run in like going, "Hi, how are you?" And then it finishes and go, "I've got to go." And that's, so I've never really had a conversation with Gavin about his own writing, I don't think.
No, it always feels quite fraught, I feel.
So it's going to be quite fraught as well, because we've only got 10 or 15 minutes. But
Yeah, I think we're both going to also do the same tonight and just leg it at the end, but yeah,
Yep.
We'll see.
Yeah, so I was trying to remember when I first met you, Gavin, and I think it was an off-the-shelf or something event where you had written The Universe versus Alex Woods, I believe, and I cornered Gavin and went, "Who's this new person that I don't know in Sheffield? Would you like to judge Novel Slam?" And I was very grateful that you did. But so I always ask people about their writing journey. Was that your first book, and how old were you, and how did you get into that? What got you writing in the first place?
Gosh, lots of questions.
Start from the beginning.
Okay, so I was 30. Was it my first book? Yes and no. It wasn't my first book I'd written. I wrote a whole other book which I sent out to like a dozen agents and got a dozen rejections back. And then I sort of, at that point, thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to try and work on it and see where it goes, or shall I try something completely different? And I thought I would just write a different book. And that's what I did, and that became The Universe versus Alex Woods, and that was 10 years ago. And yes, we did meet Off the Shelf for the first time. And yeah, it was fun. I can't believe it's been 10 years, but that is, that is what it is.
And from memory, that book sort of shot to fame very quickly.
It
I don't know
did.
what it was like for you, but
It did. That book did well. So it was in the like Richard and Judy summer read thing, and it had a lot of success off the back of that. But and it's been all downhill since then.
damn
No,
it.
no, it was. I had no expectations at all, sort of going in. I sort of, having been through the ringer once and had lots of rejections, I just wrote the book. I think, as we've said, it was a book that I thought, I'm just going to write something that I would like and that my wife would like, and I'm going to just sort of have fun with it and see what happens. So, yeah, I had no expectations at all.
Can I ask, was it snapped up straight away? Was it one of those books that you sent it to the first person and they loved it, or did that also get rejected?
No, it didn't. So it got rejected by a couple of agents first of all before my agent emailed me, and it was actually in the second round of submissions I did to agents. I sent it to, I think, 3 or 4 in the first place, and it got rejected off the back of that. So I sent it out again. I had like a list of who I was going to send it to, and I was working down the list. And at that point, I actually I decided that I'd been obsessively checking my emails before, for this, sending a book out, and it was just painful. And I thought, I'm not going to do that this time, because I realized that there's going to be a wait, and I'm going to just take a week and just, to be more measured about it. So I sent it off to the man who became my agent, and he replied within 7 minutes or something ridiculous. And then this email sat in my inbox for a week. And I then thought, well, okay, I've left it long enough, I will check. So I had this email. I thought, oh wow, I've got an email first of all. And then I realized it has bounced back. It just happened that it sort of caught him in a sort of spare, an open half hour. And he read the first chapter and said, send me the rest. And then, so I did, and I sent this thing, and I think I told him I'd been on holiday or something. I made up some sort of bizarre excuse about why I'd been ignoring his email. And he said, I just assumed you were playing hard to get. And I wasn't. And that, he thought I was playing it really cool, and I immediately, blew that conception by, saying, oh, no, that's me, let's talk about, So yeah, it was partly it was just good timing in a way, and I think that's something no one ever tells you when you start writing. There's such an element of luck that is completely out of your hands, and you have to make peace with that. You have to think that there are some things about it landing in the right person's hands at the right time, and that can be the difference between actually getting someone to publish your book and not.
Absolutely.
And also, like, whether people have just bought a book and then they're not really looking, and there's just so many things that play into it. And
I'm curious, listening to you talk about that story of what happened to the book that you had written before. Is it? Did you then produce it, and did they love it, and did it become a subsequent book, or is that book still sat somewhere?
No, it was. I'm really glad that book didn't get published, because it wasn't terrible, but I don't think it was. It was a first book. It was literally my first sort of proper attempt at writing a book, and I made a ton of mistakes writing it. What I think of as mistakes now, in terms of like the structure and the beginning, and yeah, just loads of things. But for me, it was a learning process. That was absolutely. It's still like, I know we're going to get on to like writing advice, but if someone asks me how to write a book, I say just write a book, make all the mistakes you need to make, and you will learn so much from doing that. Yeah. And I think you sort of go in naive, and you come out sort of wiser and slightly more jaded, but in a good way. And so no, I haven't actually reread it. The second book I was going to do, because I got like a 2-book deal, and that was harrowing in its own right, because that's like, oh God, I don't have a second book, and I don't know how to write a second book, and I ended up writing something that was sort of quite different, and yeah, it was definitely for the best in retrospect, and I think that's like a sort of learning thing as well. It feels like the end of the world at the time, but often it's actually like. It can be a good thing, but it's all sort of experience, and you sort of come back stronger from it.
Mm-hmm. And how many books have you got down there today?
Five.
That's your?
No, I've got
more.
Well, I've just sent one off. I was saying to Penny, I'm back in that nerve-wracking position, because my agent sent one out 2 weeks ago,
right. And
that's with like a dozen publishers at the moment, and I'm just back in the waiting thing, and that doesn't get any easier. So I'm literally waiting to hear. But I've written the 6th, and I like it. It was another one that I just had fun with, and I think the one thing that you get better at is just the stuff that you can't control, and actually not obsessing over that, and just thinking, like, I've written the book that I've written so many edits of this book, it's as good as I can make it, and now it's really out of my hands.
Yeah. Can I ask, Penny said, and a lot of writers say, like, just get your first draft done. Do you do that? Do you plot and plan, or do you just get a first draft out quickly and then work on it?
A mixture of the two. I think it's, you find what works for you, and what works in one book might not be what works in the next book. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the first one, I had like the beginning, the ending, and a lot of the sort of key moments in the book, and that worked really well, because I was just able to sort of do a dot to dot and join up. I find having an ending really probably the most useful thing, because then at least you know where you're sort of heading to, and if not an absolute sort of concrete scene, chapter, or whatever, the actual like emotional idea of where the book is going to end. So for me, that's the most important thing. But it's a real sort of mixture, with sort of half planned, half not. And yeah, my advice is always just like find what works for you, and sort of be very sort of open to that. I think it's different for everyone, and you know, no one can tell another person how to write a book, and it won't always be the same.
What I find is people, like new writers, don't realise how many times people redraft and edit, and I mean, do you do a lot of that, do you think? Or
I mean, everyone does. I think it's, I think I use this quote in this book somewhere, that Hemingway, the first draft of anything is shit. And you can get that as like a little poster where it's got various crossings out and revisions before. But that's true. It's like it takes a long time to get something that's actually polished and is good enough to send out into the world. But that's also, I find that like a useful writing thing. And one of the questions I got asked most often when I sort of started out was, how do you, I think someone said it's a really stupid question, but how do you know when your book's finished? I said, actually, it's a really good question, and it's like, it's finished when you can't do anything more with it.
Yeah.
It's like, essentially, you get to the point where this is absolutely, like, it might just be that you're sick of the sight of it by then, but I can't, like, make this any better, and that's when someone else's eyes come in, so having, like, second readers and having other people tell you what's wrong with the book is quite useful.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by a few things about your career, because I think for me, I could be wrong, so I'm curious to know, is writing your only or main job? Because I think you're the only writer I know who doesn't teach regularly or anything else. Or?
Yes, it is, but that has become harder and harder over the years, which is another story, but it is at the moment. But I'm always like, I don't know how long that will last realistically.
Is that because the publishing industry is changing?
It's a mixture, yeah. It's partly how the publishing industry is changing. But yeah, it's a whole lot of things. It's partly family circumstances. So it's a mixture. I've been incredibly privileged to be able to do it as my main job for the last 10 years. Yeah. But I think that it's such an uncertain line of work that unless you have like a runaway hit that is just like sets you up for life, then it is never a secure job. It's always, it's like the cliche, you're only ever like as good as your last book or whatever, and there is always, it feels like there's a continual pressure to like, to sort of, to just stay published, stay relevant, stay sort of, so yeah, it's tough, but yes, so
it
far.
It is doable, just about.
It is doable, but it's not it depends on your circumstances. Publishing or books are just a massive pyramid. This is what I always tell anyone. Stephen King's at the top, and then at the bottom you've got like a load of people who are just scraping by and are doing other jobs, and it's like the vast majority of people are on that level of having to do other like hustles, or it's just the reality of.
It's just a very badly paid job, isn't it? Really?
It's a very badly paid job, yeah.
And there's a lot of competition.
It's also, and there's like, it's the only job that you can be really good at and like just not get anywhere. Well, it's not the only job like that, but it's tough. And, I kind of think that every time when you talked about the novel slam and just hearing people tonight and stuff, I was like, there's legitimately times when I'm like, wow, that's great. And I also know that the reality is that it's so hard that actually that's great isn't always good enough, and I think that's
So what would your tip be on, I'm going to ask you two questions at once here. Yeah. One of the other things, like we have an assistant who does some of the marketing, and she said, I can't find Gavin on Instagram. And I said, I don't think he's very up there with the social media. Like, I know you're on Twitter, but it's quite a thing people have now, isn't it? It's like, I've got to have a platform and I've got to be on there every day doing all this sort of stuff. So that's one thing of like, is it essential for a writer to have all that sort of stuff, or can you get away without it? But my other question, I suppose, is what do you think people can do to give themselves that edge? If they're a good writer, how do you...
I don't know. Like I said, there's an element of luck involved, and that's absolutely inescapable. And anyone who tells you there isn't is just lying. There is, for every like successful author, there's like a dozen that could have been that author and that are good enough to be that author, and they just haven't had the breaks at the right time. Social media, I wish I'd been more involved in social media 10 years ago, but it's not something that really I naturally do. Like, I don't use social media personally, and I didn't like have a smartphone until like 2016 or something, and I'm not really into it. And the advice that I have read from other people is, if you're good at it, then do it. But if you're not, don't try and force it. And if it's like something you enjoy, do it. Some people are incredibly good at putting themselves out there and doing all that stuff, and other people aren't. And I'm skeptical about how much it does. I do know that if you've got a social media following, that will make a huge difference to your prospects of getting published. But that's before, like, actually, you know, you've still got to sort of check all the other boxes as well. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it hurts, but I don't think it's like worth obsessing over and thinking that it's like, you know, it's the be all and end all of sort of, you know, getting seen.
So persistence, maybe, just the
Persistence
keeping going with
is the number
agent,
one. There's
yeah.
absolutely no doubt at all. But it's just a case of like keeping on going. I think as well, and I still think this, and I think like regardless of how anything goes with your writing, it's like the only reason to write is because you love doing it, and that doesn't really change at any point. Like, if I sold 1 million books tomorrow, I would still just be doing the same stuff. I'd still be like pottering around in my house, like getting frustrated and trying to think of ideas. And it's good in a way because it's not something anyone can stop you doing. It's sort of you don't need any resources. You don't need any sort of like anyone that aren't like gatekeepers to the actual writing process itself. So. Yeah, persistence, enjoyment, just actually like focusing on I'm doing something that I want to do and that is sort of worthwhile in and of itself, regardless of what happens. I think you've got to have that attitude. And I think if you're serious about like pursuing it professionally, you've just got to also, but I think this just goes with the territory as well, because I haven't really met many writers who don't. You've got to have very, very high standards, be self-critical, have that ability to sort of keep pushing yourself, and obviously a huge amount of self-discipline. But again, the people that don't have that won't even get to the end of a first draft. So, yeah.
I'm going to ask you one more question, just because you said I'll be walking around the house getting ideas. Where do your ideas come from, and are they based in your own life, or are they completely imaginary, random, or?
It's a mixture. This is a good segue, actually. It's like we've set this up,
good.
which we haven't. So this was really personal, this book, because this is my latest one. I'm going to read a little bit in a minute. It's a mixture. Some of it's news stuff. It's like just an idea that catches my eye, like in a news story I'll read or something I'll hear. So the first book, Alex Woods, it was sort of, I had the character and the voice in my head for a few months, and I had like the sort of idea of what the tone of the book was going to be, which was going to be sort of a coming of age, sort of Kurt Vonnegut-esque sort of stylistically story. And it was going to be about a boy who has a really unusual friendship with it was going to be his grandfather originally, but that sort of relationship. And it became about assisted suicide eventually, and that was just because it was in the news a lot, but it's just something that I heard, like, I don't know what this says about my family, but I talked to my parents about it a lot growing up, and like they'd like...
That sounds like my family. That's like a standard dinner table conversation in our house.
Yeah, it's just like, you'll be like, you know, tucking into your spag bol or whatever, and your dad will say, if I ever am in a position where I'm like no longer able to do stuff, please, like, just, you know. So it was a mixture of that, but that was the sort of the plot thing. Once I had the idea that there's going to be this sort of age gap, unusual friendship, and then the sort of assisted suicide thing was the germ of the idea, because that gave me the where the book's going. And then this one is, so I wrote this for my daughter. This is my first book it's normally for young adults, but I always think that's a hazy distinction anyway. I don't think it's massively different to anything else I've written. It just happens that the characters are teenagers. So I wrote this with my daughter in mind. My daughter's autistic. She was diagnosed at the age of 4. And at that time, my wife and I were talking about, because she was very young, obviously, to have that diagnosis. And we were saying, well, what are we going to tell Amelia? And, you know, how do we broach this? Because we want to sort of, I don't know, what's the best way to sort of, you know, to talk to her about it, really. And in the end, we decided we wanted her to have it growing up being part of her and being very sort of normalized, and just, you know, her understanding her own sort of, her own self and her strengths and weaknesses, why she found some things hard and some things really easy. and stuff like that. And my wife, in the end, wrote her a short letter, in sort of kid-friendly language. So my daughter was she's really precocious in some areas, like classic autistic profile of spiky profile, they call it. Really, really good at some things, absolutely clueless about other things. And she taught herself to read when she was 2, and was incredibly precocious in that respect. So we thought, well, we'll write her a letter because she loves to read and she takes information on board. And the story grew out of that. The letter became the beginning of, or an early part of the story, the idea of a mother writing a letter to her daughter. But this is sort of looking forward to the future as well. So this is about Phoebe when she is 15, 16, and is dealing really with the sort of teenage years and that moment in everyone's life, regardless of who or what you are or whatever, that where life becomes so much more difficult and tricky. So it's really about sort of navigating that difficult part of your life. So this one's actually quite more personal than a lot of the stuff. It's not autobiographical in any way, but there's a lot of elements of my experience, my life in it.
Great. And I was looking at those books thinking, which one shall I buy? And my daughter is 15 and has just been diagnosed autistic.
So, yeah. I remember talking about this a year ago in our yearly chat.
I'll definitely get that one. I'm going to let you read, Gavin, and I wish we could talk for longer. Like I said, the time pressure is always a problem here. But
Beverley, one day we will talk properly, and not just in 2-minute takes. So I'm going to stand because hopefully it will sort of project a bit better. So you don't really need any context. This is because I'm reading right from the beginning of the book. I'm conscious of time, so I will try and not make it too long. So this is chapter 1. Dear Mum, 2018 was the year Bethany went off the rails. It was the year many things happened, but Bethany is the main thing I need to talk about here. After all, she was pretty much the catalyst for everything else. From my doomed attempt at self-improvement to my decision to flee the country for an indefinite period. I'm not trying to absolve myself of responsibility. I should make that clear. I made my own decisions, some of which ended up causing a great deal of damage. All I'm saying is that I had to respond to a situation that was often beyond my control, and even further beyond my comfort zone. This continues to be something I struggle with. I am, however, getting ahead of myself. I need to start at the start, on the evening that my routine was broken. It was a turning point because it marked the exact moment my life stopped feeling safe and predictable. It began with the car in the sea. I was walking Gladys, our Welsh Border Collie, back from the North Beach when the screaming became audible. It was faint at first. This is the problem with physical books. Barely indistinguishable from the shriek of a gull carried on the wind. But as we made our way across the dunes, the sound gradually resolved, becoming more human. It was unfortunate because prior to this, everything had been going well. There were some extremely interesting outer cumulus clouds gathering in the northeast, underlit by the setting sun. The rest of the sky was turning a pleasing shade of pink, and the air smelled of salt and sand and wet vegetation. But now I worried that our walk was about to be ruined. Gladys had started yipping in response to the screams, and I was faced with a dilemma. On the one hand, I already knew what the problem was, or I had a very strong suspicion based on the time of day and the phase of the moon, and it was unlikely that anyone was going to die. If I avoided the causeway and stuck to the dunes, then I'd be home by 8 o'clock, and I could continue with my evening as scheduled, with no harm done. On the other hand, this was probably not the right thing to do. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to draw up a flowchart of options and potential outcomes. The screaming was ongoing and having a significant impact on my ability to think. I resolved to take a peek at the situation to assess the danger. Afterwards, I'd be able to make an informed decision about what action, if any, was required. When we reached the top of the dune abutting the causeway, the car was approximately 20 meters distant. It was stationary in a couple of feet of swirling seawater. I doubted that any of the water got inside the car, as cars are designed to be watertight, but the woman in the passenger seat had started to panic nevertheless. She was halfway out of her window, trying to climb onto the roof, while the man in the driver's seat was shouting at her to calm down and stop being so bloody hysterical. In response, she continued to scream hysterically. I observed the scene for a minute or so, taking in the relevant facts. The car was a BMW, and it looked sporty and impractical, certainly not suitable for driving on a flooded road. As for the people, the woman looked to be approximately 25 to 30 years old. She had dark hair and was wearing some kind of flimsy wraparound beach dress, and was not very good at climbing. The man was mostly bald, red in the face, and I estimated his age to be about 50 years minimum. My first thought that he was probably the woman's father, except he kept shouting at her and telling her to get back in the car and stop being such a fucking drama queen, and this didn't seem like the sort of thing you'd say to your daughter. So it's possible that he was her much older husband or boyfriend. I was unable to draw any firm conclusion. I was loath to go down to them, but Gladys had decided that enough was enough. She darted down the embankment, plunged into the sea, and started barking again with great enthusiasm. This caused both the man and the woman to turn and look in my direction, which was not easy for them because the man had to pivot in his seat, and the woman was still clinging to the side of the car. And it was not easy for me because I don't like being looked at, especially not by strangers. This is something else that hasn't changed in the last 6 years. Oh, thank fuck, the man said. Listen, we need to get someone to tow us out of here. Can you get someone? Can you do that? I told him I could not. And there was a small pause as the waves continued to lap against the BMW's wheel arches. Then the woman started screaming again. Well, that's what I thought at first. After a moment's reconsideration, I decided that she was actually laughing, but her laughter was peculiar, a series of strangled, high-pitched yelps. Since the situation was not humorous, this was a confusing development. So I explained carefully that there was a close to zero chance that anyone was going to attempt the causeway with the tide this high and still rising. And anyway, from the angle their car was at, approximately 45 degrees to the straight line of the road, I found it unlikely that it could be freed so easily. My hypothesis was that at least one of the back wheels had come off the tarmac, possibly the result of a poorly executed three-point turn, and was stuck in the marshy ground at the bottom of the embankment. The vehicle would be going nowhere until the tide had fallen sufficiently, which would be sometime close to midnight. Midnight, the man repeated. The next low tide is at 3:06 a.m., I shouted to him, but the road is clear 3 hours before that, give or take 15 minutes. It depends on the wind speed and the direction and the atmospheric pressure. The man stared at me. I don't know why. It's possible he was waiting for further information. But in the meantime, the woman had finally managed to scramble out of the window and onto the roof. She started pounding on the metal with her fists, which made Gladys bark again. Gladys was finding the situation extremely exciting. This genius said we'd be okay, the woman shouted. He said it would be just like going through a ford. It's not like a ford, I told her. It's the North Sea. She ignored this and kept pounding on the roof, and the man kept shouting at her to stop, because she was making the situation 10 times worse than it had to be. And I closed my eyes and bit the skin around my fingernails. It's a habit I've been trying very hard to break, but right then I needed the pain to distract me. The noise, the people, the situation, it was all very distressing. He's right, I told the woman, because she was really making everything worse. But she didn't hear me, so I just kept repeating it. He's right, he's right, he's right, until she did. Who's right? She yelled. Who's right? This seemed an odd question, given there was only one person I could be referring to. Moreover, it put me in a rather awkward position, not knowing the nature of their relationship. I decided the safest option was to hedge my bets. Your father or significantly older partner. The woman started screeching again. I decided she was mentally unstable and looked at my boots for a while. Then the man said, "For fuck's sake, go and get someone else. Go and get a grown-up." I phoned Daddy. 2 tourists have driven their car into the sea, I told him. Oh, Christ, he said. Are they okay? Are you okay? I'm okay. I'm on the embankment. Stay on the embankment. Of course I'll stay on the embankment. I know you will. What about the tourists? Are they okay? Have they called the Coast Guard? They're not in any immediate danger, I said. And the Coast Guard is not required. They got stuck in the first dip in the road before they made it out into the channel. But the woman has climbed onto the roof and is intermittently hysterical. The man is still in his seat, and they keep shouting at each other. It's highly unpleasant. I was having to shout a little bit too, because the wind was gusting and the phone line was not great. The tourists were both glaring at me. Okay, just hold tight, Phoebe, Daddy said. I'll be there as soon as I can. I love you. I know. Please hurry. I hung up and told the tourists that my father was on his way. Is he bringing a tow cable? Asked the man. Please tell me he's bringing a tow cable. He's not bringing a tow cable, I said, rubbing my temples. No sensible person would try to drive on this road. Thank you. So, thanks again for listening. I do have books. I do not have change, but I'm prepared to haggle. So if anyone wants to buy a book or just wants to come and have a chat, that is fine. And yes,
Thank
thanks,
you
Beverley.
so much. Thank you, Gavin. I do have a card reader as well, if that's helpful. So.
Beverley has a card reader, and we can work something out.
Thanks. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Gavin. I wish we had more time to hear from you, but I just want to make sure we get in the people who've booked for the open mic.